Thank you, Congressman. And last question from the Commission of these witnesses, Commissioner Ben-Veniste.
I want to join my colleagues in thanking you both for your help and for your testimony here today. I want to ask a very specific question about September 11th, and I want to focus on Flight 77, American 77, which, according to the timelines that we have, indicate that at 8:55 in the morning, FAA received information that Flight 77 turned off its course. By that time, the fate of American Airlines 11 was known, and United Airlines Flight 175 was declared to be hijacked and crashed shortly thereafter. Why was it, according to all the information you have been able to accumulate since, that Flight 77 was not immediately declared to be hijacked? According to our information, NORAD was not notified until 9:24, approximately a half an hour after, in hindsight, it would indicate that FAA had very good reason to know something was terribly, terribly wrong.
Commissioner, I'd like to go back and look at those records more carefully, because that is not consistent with my understanding of it and the timeline that I remember. That the timeline that I have, that I remember, is one that had a notification of NORAD twice before the time that you mentioned, so that there had been 3 notifications. But again, I would like to submit that specific timeline for the record, with the first notification being at 8:34.
At 8:34?
At 8:34 from a controller in at the Boston office, and again, let me submit those for the record, and let me double check. It was the notes that I have were 8:34.
We're talking about American Airlines Flight 77, the plane that ultimately crashed into the Pentagon.
Yes.
Now, our information, I'll repeat it again, because this is grossly outside what we have been informed, is that at 8:55, Flight 77 was detected by controllers and FAA personnel to be off its course. By that time, we knew that 2 planes were hijacked, the 2 that hit the Twin Towers. At 8:55, this information was recorded according to FAA. Now, it was not until 9:24, according to NORAD, and if you have some other information, we would be very interested in receiving it. But it was not until 9:24, according to NORAD, that they received any advice from FAA with respect to Flight 77. Do you have some other information that would indicate that FAA notified NORAD prior to that time?
My understanding, Commissioner, is that the notification was earlier, but I'd like to ask that the FAA air traffic control chronology be submitted for the record.
Well, we're operating on the basis of the material that's already been submitted. Mr. Mead, can you shed any further light on that?
No, sir, I have no information on that.
Do you have, in the after-action investigation that has been conducted by FAA, any information to shed light on why it was that FAA delayed notifying NORAD, if it is in fact the case that they had information suggesting that Flight 77 was off course? Because this is the information we're receiving from NORAD.
Commissioner, the information that I have is that the first notification was at 8:34 from an individual controller in Boston to Otis, to NORAD at Otis. The next notification, I believe, was about, and it was about 8:20 when the first indication that there was a difficulty with the American flight, and that
Are you not confusing Flight 11 with Flight 77? Because...
sorry, I may be. If I could go back and look at it. It's been a while since I have looked at that chronology.
In a general sense, having in mind that you do not have this squarely in mind at the moment, in a general sense, did you investigate whether there was a delay by FAA in notifying NORAD with respect to Flight 77?
We investigated the whole process of the NORAD notification. My belief is that we did notify them in a timely fashion, but we also felt, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we also felt that NORAD, that the procedures with NORAD and the procedures for communication needed to be much clearer, and those protocols were changed directly after 9/11.
Mr. Chairman, may I simply, for purposes of perhaps refreshing our witness's recollection, read from the testimony of General Eberhardt, who will be here tomorrow from NORAD, who testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee on October 25, 2001, in answer to a question from Senator Levin. General Eberhardt, there's been some confusion about the sequence of events on September 11. Perhaps you can clear this up for us. Timeline that we've been given is that at 8:55 on September 11, American Airlines Flight 77 began turning east, away from its intended course, and at 9:10, Flight 77 was detected by FAA radar over West Virginia heading east. That was after the two planes had struck the World Trade Towers. Then 15 minutes later, at 9:25, the FAA notified NORAD that Flight 77 was headed toward Washington. Was that the first notification, the 9:25 notification that NORAD or DOD had that 77 was probably hijacked? And then General Eberhardt said, I show it as 9:24 that we were notified, and then he indicated that this was the first documented notification that he had. And then, interestingly enough, the questioning was, well, why was the delay? I'm paraphrasing, and General Eberhardt said, you'll have to ask the FAA. So we're asking.
Right. And I'd like to say, I appreciate that. I'd like to submit it for the record. I really, it is not as clear, perhaps, as, and my recollection is not quite the same, so I'd like to double check it before I say it here.
Well, you will double check it and you'll get back to
We
us.
certainly
It
will.
would be useful if you could get back to staff this evening.
I was thinking that we could probably get the answer this evening, because
Thank you.